So you know all that stuff you sent over
Yeah.
about how we make decisions and all the psychology behind it. Really fascinating stuff. I mean, we're making choices all day long, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
From tiny things like what to eat to big life stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like we could all use a little help making those choices a little bit better, a little bit smarter.
Absolutely. So today we are going on a deep dive to try to unpack some of the big ideas in this research, pull out some golden nuggets that everyone can actually use.
Yes. So we can actually apply these ideas to our lives, right? Not just like, oh, that's interesting, and then go about our day.
Exactly. Like what can you actually do differently tomorrow based on this stuff?
So let's just jump right into it. I think the first thing that really stood out to me, and you kind of alluded to it a second ago, is that we don't always think as rationally as we think we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we imagine we're making these perfectly calculated choices, but it turns out our brains just aren't wired that way.
Yeah, so I think the idea that really helps us understand this is something called the dual process theory. Okay, dual process theory. So two ways of thinking.
Exactly. So it comes from this psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, a total rock star in the field, actually, won a Nobel Prize for his work. And he wrote this amazing book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which really popularized this concept.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So he basically says we've got these two systems running in our brains, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is all about speed. It's our fast, intuitive, gut reaction kind of thinking, often fueled by emotion.
Okay. I'm getting that when you jump back from something scary or if you see a sale on something you really want, you're like, ooh, I need that. That's system 1.
Perfect example. And it's super useful, right?
Yeah.
Keeps us safe, helps us make quick decisions. But it's also where we make a lot of our mistakes, especially when it comes to the bigger, more important choices in life.
Gotcha. Okay, so what about system 2 then?
So System 2 is our slow, deliberate, more logical thinking. It's the part of our brain that kicks in when we really have to think things through.
So weighing the pros and cons of something or planning out a big project. That's system 2 hard at work.
Exactly. It's slower and takes more effort, but it can lead to much better decisions in the long run, especially for those really important, complex things in life.
Oh, I see. So system 1 is the quick, easy, but sometimes risky choice. And system 2 is the slower, but more reliable option.
Exactly. And the challenge is that most of the time, System 1 is running the show. We're often on autopilot, relying on those quick gut feelings. So the real key to making smarter choices is knowing when to slow down and engage that System 2 thinking.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not about turning off system 1 altogether, but learning when to hit the brakes and really analyze the situation. But how do we actually do that? How do we know when to switch from system 1 to system 2?
Well, there are a few things to watch out for. First, pay attention to the stakes. If the decision has potentially big consequences, like affecting your finances, your career, your relationships, that's a signal to slow down and engage System 2.
Okay, makes sense. So if I'm just picking between 2 shirts in the morning, I can probably trust my gut. But if I'm thinking about changing jobs, I need to really think it through.
Perfect example. Another clue is when you feel strong emotions, like fear, anger, or excitement.
Because those emotions might be clouding our judgment.
Exactly. System 1 is heavily influenced by emotions. So when you're feeling those strong emotions, that's a sign to step back, take a breath, and let those emotions settle before making any big decisions.
Okay, so high stakes and strong emotions are cues to engage system 2. Are there any other times when it's really important to use that slower, more thoughtful way of thinking?
Definitely. If the decision is complex, with lots of factors to consider, or if it's something you haven't dealt with before, that's another time to switch gears and engage System 2.
So not just blindly following what you've always done or what other people are doing, but really thinking through the specifics of the situation.
Exactly. Now, here's another really important point that this material highlights. We've got to be aware of these things called cognitive biases. They can really trip us up, even when we think we're being logical.
Yeah, those are those mental shortcuts that can lead us astray, right?
Yes, they're like little tricks our minds play on us, often without us even realizing it. And they can really distort our thinking and lead to bad decisions.
So what are some of the big ones we should be aware of?
Let's start with confirmation bias. This is our tendency to seek out information that confirms what we already believe and to kind of ignore information that challenges those beliefs. It's like we're building a case for our existing opinions rather than genuinely exploring all sides of an issue.
Oh, I see this all the time online. People sharing articles that just reinforce their own views and dismissing anything that contradicts them.
Exactly. And it's not just online, it happens in every area of our lives. Confirmation bias can lead us to make decisions that are based on incomplete or biased information. So it's really important to be aware of this tendency and actively seek out diverse perspectives, even if they make us uncomfortable.
Okay, so challenge yourself to consider viewpoints that you might not initially agree with. What about other biases?
Another sneaky one is the availability heuristic. This is where we tend to judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall examples of it.
Like if you've just seen a news story about a plane crash, you might suddenly feel like flying is super dangerous, even though statistically it's still very safe.
That's a perfect example. Our brains tend to overestimate the likelihood of things that are vivid, dramatic, or recent in our memory. So we need to be cautious about letting those vivid examples unduly influence our decisions. It's important to look at the bigger picture and the actual statistics, not just the examples that pop into our heads first.
Okay, so don't let a few dramatic stories skew your perception of the real risks. Got it. What other mental traps should we watch out for?
This next one is super fascinating. Anchoring bias. This is where we get overly influenced by the first piece of information we receive, even if it's totally irrelevant. It's like that first piece of information sets an anchor in our minds, and all our subsequent thinking is kind of tethered to that anchor.
Okay, that sounds kind of weird. Can you give an example of how that plays out in real life?
Absolutely. So there's this classic study by Tversky and Kahneman. They asked people to estimate things like the percentage of African countries in the UN. But before asking, they spun a wheel with random numbers on it. What they found is that people's estimates were heavily influenced by that random number on the wheel, even though it had nothing to do with the actual question.
Wow, that is wild. So even meaningless information can really sway our thinking. How do we avoid falling into that trap?
The key is to be aware of the power of first impressions and initial pieces of information. When you're making a decision, try to actively question that initial information you receive. Is it really relevant? Is it accurate? Is it coming from a reliable source? Don't just blindly accept it as truth.
Okay, so be skeptical of that first piece of data, especially if it comes from a questionable source. So we've talked about the two systems of thinking and some of the biases that can trip us up. But what about some actual strategies we can use to make better decisions? The material mentioned a bunch of tools and techniques. Which ones stood out to you?
One that I personally find super helpful is the 1-0-10-10 rule. This is a simple but really effective framework for thinking through the long-term consequences of your choices.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about this. It's all about asking yourself how you'll feel about a decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years, right?
Exactly. It forces you to shift your perspective beyond the immediate gratification or discomfort and consider the long-term impact. So instead of just asking yourself, do I want to do this right now? You're also asking, will I regret this in a few months? Will this still matter to me in a few years?
It seems really helpful for those impulsive decisions, like splurging on something you can't afford or quitting your job in a moment of frustration. In 10 minutes, it might feel great, but in 10 months or 10 years, the consequences could be much different.
Absolutely. It's a great way to tap into that system two thinking and make choices that are more aligned with your long-term goals and values. It's like a little reality check to make sure your short-term desires aren't leading you down a path you'll regret later on.
Okay, so before making a big decision, run it through the 1-0-10-10 rule. That's a great takeaway. What about other strategies?
Another one that I find incredibly helpful both in my personal and professional life is the Eisenhower matrix. It's a fantastic tool for prioritizing tasks and making sure you're focusing on the things that truly matter.
Oh yeah, the one with the 4 quadrants. Important and urgent, important but not urgent, and so on. It seems so simple, but I know I often get caught up in the urgent stuff, even if it's not really that important.
That's the trap a lot of us fall into. We get so busy reacting to emails, phone calls, and deadlines that we neglect the truly important things, the stuff that actually moves us forward in the long run.
Right, like planning for the future, developing new skills, or just taking care of our own well-being. Those things are super important, but they often get pushed aside when the urgent stuff piles up.
That's exactly where the Eisenhower matrix comes in. It forces you to be really honest with yourself about which tasks are truly important and which ones are just distractions. And then it gives you a clear framework for prioritizing your time and energy.
So it's not just about getting things done, but about getting the right things done.
Exactly. It's about consciously choosing to invest your time and energy in the activities that will have the biggest positive impact on your life, both in the short term and the long term. It's about being proactive, not just reactive.
Okay, so the Tuofi 1010 rule for thinking through consequences and the Eisenhower matrix for prioritizing our tasks. Those are two really practical strategies. What about for situations where things are constantly changing and you need to be more adaptable?
For those more dynamic environments, there's a framework called the OODA loop. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act.
OODA loop. Okay, sounds kind of military.
It was actually developed by fighter pilot John Boyd, so you're not far off. He was trying to figure out how to gain an advantage in fast-paced, unpredictable dogfights.
I can see how that would be relevant to decision making in general. Life throws a lot of curveballs our way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the OODA loop is all about being able to quickly adapt to changing circumstances. You start by observing what's happening around you, gathering as much information as possible.
Okay, so just paying attention to the situation and getting a clear picture of what's going on.
Then you orient yourself, which means making sense of that information, analyzing it in the context of your goals and your current situation.
So figuring out what that information means for you and how it might affect your plans.
Exactly. Then you decide on a course of action based on your understanding of the situation. And finally, you act, putting that decision into motion.
Okay, so it's observe, orient, decide, act. But it's not just a one-time process, right?
That's the key. It's a loop.
Mhm.
Once you've acted, you immediately go back to observing, seeing how the situation has changed as a result of your actions. Then you reorient, redecide, and react. It's a continuous cycle of learning and adapting.
So it's all about being flexible and responsive, constantly adjusting your approach based on the latest information. That sounds super valuable in today's fast-paced world where things are always changing.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder that we don't always have to have all the answers up front.
Yeah.
We can make a decision, see how it plays out, and then adjust course as needed. It's about being agile and embracing the unexpected.
Okay, the OD loop, another great tool for the toolbox. Now, the material also talked about a technique called the pre-mortem technique. What's that all about?
This one sounds a bit morbid at first, but it's actually a really powerful way to anticipate potential problems before they happen.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does it work?
So imagine you're about to make a big decision or launch a new project. With the pre-mortem technique, you basically gather your team, or even just yourself, and you fast forward to the future, imagining that the decision or project has completely failed.
So like a mental time travel to a worst case scenario.
Exactly. And then you spend time brainstorming all the possible reasons why that failure might have occurred. What went wrong? Where did we make mistakes? What assumptions did we make that turned out to be false?
It's like doing a post-mortem analysis, but before the project even starts.
Precisely. And by doing this, you can uncover potential risks and weaknesses that you might not have considered otherwise. It forces you to think critically about all the things that could go wrong, and that can help you make more informed decisions and develop better contingency plans.
So it's about being proactive and anticipating potential problems rather than just reacting to them after they happen.
Exactly. It's like giving yourself a chance to learn from your future mistakes without actually having to make them. It can be a really powerful tool for avoiding unnecessary setbacks and increasing your chances of success.
I love that. It's like a mental simulation to help you prepare for different possibilities. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the two systems of thinking to cognitive biases and a whole bunch of practical strategies. But the material also touched on some psychological techniques that can enhance our decision making. One that caught my eye was visualization.
Ah, yes, the power of visualization. This is a technique that's been used by athletes, performers, and successful people in all walks of life. It's all about using the power of your imagination to mentally rehearse positive outcomes and prepare yourself for success.
So it's not just about daydreaming or hoping for the best. There's an actual psychological benefit to visualizing things.
Absolutely. Research has shown that mental rehearsal can actually improve performance in a variety of tasks. When you vividly imagine yourself succeeding, you're essentially training your brain to recognize opportunities and respond effectively in real-life situations.
So it's like building mental muscle memory for success.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just the technical skills. Visualization can also help you build confidence, reduce anxiety, and improve your focus. When you've mentally rehearsed a situation, you're much less likely to be thrown off by unexpected challenges or setbacks.
That makes sense. If you've already mentally overcome those challenges in your mind, you'll be more prepared to handle them in reality. So how can we actually use visualization effectively?
The key is to be as specific and detailed as possible in your visualizations. Don't just vaguely imagine a positive outcome. Really immerse yourself in the experience. See yourself performing well, feel the emotions of success, and hear the positive feedback you're receiving.
So it's about creating a vivid mental movie of the desired outcome, engaging all your senses.
Exactly. And don't just focus on the end goal. Visualize the entire process, including potential obstacles and how you'll overcome them. This helps you prepare for those challenges and build your resilience.
Okay, so detailed, sensory-rich visualization, including potential challenger and how you'll handle them. That's a great takeaway. What about the other psychological technique mentioned in the material, cognitive reframing?
This is all about changing your perspective, shifting the way you think about a situation or problem. It's recognizing that our initial interpretations aren't always accurate or helpful, and that there might be other, more constructive ways to view things.
So it's like choosing to look at the glass as half full instead of half empty.
That's a good analogy. It's about actively searching for the positive, the opportunity, the learning experience, even in difficult situations.
So instead of seeing a setback as a complete failure, you might reframe it as a valuable lesson that will help you make better decisions in the future.
Exactly. And research has shown that this kind of positive reframing can actually reduce stress and anxiety, improve your mood, and boost your creativity and problem-solving abilities.
That's amazing. So just by changing the way we think about things, we can actually change the way we feel and the way we perform.
It's incredibly powerful. It's not about denying the negative or pretending everything is perfect. It's about choosing to focus on the aspects of a situation that are most empowering and helpful.
Okay, so visualization for mentally rehearsing success and cognitive reframing for shifting our perspective. Those are two powerful tools for enhancing our decision making. Now, the material also talk about how all these strategies can be applied to different areas of our lives, like finances, career, relationships, and so on.
Yes, it's important to remember that these aren't just abstract concepts. They have very real-world applications.
So, for example, if I'm struggling with financial decisions, I could use the 10-10-10 rule to think through the long-term impact of my spending habits or the Eisenhower matrix to prioritize my financial goals.
Exactly. Or if you're facing a big career decision, you could use visualization to imagine yourself succeeding in a new role, or the pre-mortem technique, to anticipate potential challenges and develop contingency plans.
And in our relationships, we could be more mindful of when we're relying on that quick emotional system one thinking and instead try to engage our more rational system two.
Precisely. These strategies can be applied in countless ways, and the key is to find what works best for you in different situations.
Okay, so it's about being flexible, experimenting with different tools, and finding what resonates with you. Now, the last part of the material focused on cultivating a decision-making mindset. It's not just about knowing the strategies, but about actively developing our skills in this area.
Absolutely. It's like any other skill. The more you practice, the better you become. So the material suggested a few key things we can do to continuously improve our decision-making abilities.
I'm all ears. What are those actionable steps?
First, make it a point to practice making decisions regularly, even with small, low-stakes choices. This helps you build your decision-making muscle and get more comfortable with the process.
So don't be afraid to make decisions, even if they seem minor. It's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. And as you make those decisions, pay attention to how you feel, what factors you're considering, and the outcomes of those choices. This helps you develop self-awareness and identify patterns in your decision-making.
So like keeping a decision journal where you reflect on your choices and the results.
That's a great idea. It can really help you identify your strengths, your weaknesses, and any biases that might be influencing your decisions. And finally, don't be afraid to seek out feedback from people you trust. Ask for their perspectives on your choices, and be open to constructive criticism. It can be a valuable way to learn and grow.
So it's about being open to different viewpoints, learning from others, and constantly refining our approach.
Exactly. Remember, making good decisions is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice, effort, and a willingness to learn and grow.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about how my brain works and how I can make better choices in every area of my life. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
It's been my pleasure. It's a fascinating topic, and I'm always excited to explore these ideas with people who are eager to learn and apply them to their own lives.
And to our listeners, as you go about your day today and make all those big and small decisions, think about this. What's one area of your life where you could intentionally slow down, engage that system two thinking, and make a more deliberate choice? It could be something as simple as choosing healthier food options or as significant as considering a career change. Whatever it is, remember the power of these strategies and give them a try. We encourage you to observe your own decision-making process in the coming days. See if you can identify some of these biases we've talked about and maybe even experiment with some of these techniques. You might be surprised at the positive impact it can have on your life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.